All right, thank you.
Hi, my question is for Lakshmi. I was just wondering, I mean, as we know that in any case, whenever you have any customer setup, they do not want it to be disturbed. So when we come to OpenFlow, how do you think will it be accepted by existing customers?
So now what customers are saying is, we can manage our networks better than you can. So that's what they're telling us. Google is coming and telling us that you don't tell us how to run the network. You just give us control and we will run it. Apparently they know better. So, but that's how it is, right? Because that's the change in the paradigm. They think that they can write better protocol, they can have better policies, better implementation, because they know their software well, which makes absolute sense. Because they know that their video requires this kind of latency, and they know what policies to apply on the routers. So we give them access to the OpenFlow. The one thing that what we can do from our side is that to make sure that whenever these apps give us, give us instructions, we kind of validate them and make sure that they're not messing up too much of the network. And then program what makes sense. So that control we have, that's it. But apart from that, it has to be the apps which make the call. So,
but my point was more on like, there are existing legacy systems.
Correct.
Is there like a plan how to bring
yes,
them up?
Like any technology transition, right? So what will happen is the existing softwares will have to be revamped to have include this module. Like today we have switches in Juniper and Cisco and Brocade and everywhere, which the new software versions are coming up with modules which can understand OpenFlow APIs. So they coexist with the current protocols. So slowly what will happen is the protocols that are running on your boxes will kind of turn off and let them get controlled by external factors. So, but one thing you have to remember is this whole OpenFlow SDN and everything works very well in a controlled environment like a data center. If you come and say, I want to run my ISP on SDN, oh, your host, right? I mean, that's like impossibility. Maybe it'll get there someday. But today, it is this portion which is being, maybe from here, people will learn from mistakes and kind of extend it to the whole network. But currently, it's in a very contained environment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending this. We know that there's one last question. Can we take? Yeah.
So typically, it is considered that hardware is much, much more faster than software. And now we are moving everything, all the computing power, everything into the software. What kind of latency differences are you seeing by moving things into the software, and how is the industry accepting this, saying when you say software is faster than hardware?
Okay, I didn't mention that in any of my slides, but okay. The thing is, software, in order to act, what is it talking to? It's talking to the hardware anyway. Like, given if it is a Cisco thing also, right? We have the switches, and we are talking to switches via APIs. So even if there is a software, it's not just with hardware you cannot run, because you need to install multiple people at multiple things in order to manage. Only with the software, right? One person sitting at a data center or something will be able to manage all the things. Regarding the latency part, it's a very good point which you have brought in. So the latency actually gets added. So if the hardware is actually giving some latency, which you will have to live with, on top of it, you're calling another API again to call the same command in the hardware. So it's not something you're inducing. Okay, it's there and you're living with it. So we are managing whatever we had, but most of the time what happens is the application also will be in such a way, the APIs, so they're very lightweighted functions. So they would not cause any harm to your system. I mean, they wouldn't add latency. That is how the API kits, the product companies will be giving to the customers. I mean, if the software what they're giving is adding weight to the application, right, then it's a no-no, actually, because it's going to hamper your overall performance is going to come down, which will take a beating later. Did I answer that?
I'm still not convinced software can be faster than hardware.
No, we are not saying it's faster. I mean, that's what my first statement. I didn't mention it any of the slide. We didn't mention it as faster. We said it can be optimized, and it can, because of the self-healing thing, right? See, simple example, you have like one host, you have a physical machine and it went down. So you need someone to walk up to the machine, see why the failure had occurred, open the chassis, see whether the fan is okay, the hard disk and everything. But what are we doing now? We are not doing that. We are using integrated lights out or some application wherein we do a remote access to that machine, see the health status of the server. Is the fan okay? Are the batteries okay? Is the power supply okay? How is the cooling fan? That's how we get to see everything. So this software also, what it does, it is talking to the IPMI. It's still talking to the same thing, and then the management is easy. The moment you have people, right, you're tied up. You're in a prison, you're binded. When you don't have such kind of things, you're like free to move an atom, right? You can do everything.
So in essential, what you're telling me is the critical part, you're removing the human element there and just making sure a software makes those decisions instead of a human for you. I don't know. I
cost.
reserve my comment.
It's a cost.
I think you all were focusing more on the technology and other things, and I did say something about the cost, right? There was a little mention about it, but I think, especially for Cisco, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the cost, because the bread and butter is in the selling of the routers. Now we are moving into this other, I think this is a political question, but anyway, I want to pose it.
I have asked this myself.
Exactly, because and for the hardware person here, I mean, it's the total cost of ownership, right? And the uptimes. Those are the things that are going to we're going to gain by going into the software-defined data center. And the speed is one thing we learn to live with it, I guess. I mean, it's like, what do you get for loss of speed? But I'm more interested in what your thoughts are on the whole pay-as-you-go and the huge benefits we are going to get because of getting into the software or virtualization that we in VMware are at, and how Cisco plays into it. If you can answer that, do, but otherwise,
I might not be able to, I'll tell you honestly. But the thing about these vendor companies, I don't want to mention names, So vendor companies, what does a router do, right? It looks up a packet and then looks it up in various kinds of tables and sends it out. And what does the control plane in the router do today? Program these tables. What we are doing is just taking this part away and giving access to an application to program it. But the lookup, the TCAM programming, the TCAM lookup, everything is still happening in hardware. So you still need a Cisco and a Juniper and a Brocade to give you first-class TCAMs and then high-grade memory performance to do your packet lookup instantly. Today we are talking about 60 million packets per second. You can't have that on an Intel desktop, right? You still need like high-gear Cisco equipment to do this. The only thing we are saying is, take away the software, take it away, put it somewhere else, and then let it control it. That answers your question about, the control plane. What we're saying is take away the control plane. The latency, the configuration happens once in a while. It's not like data path, right? Not at line speed. So line speed, you don't have any latency. The only latency comes in there. So in that sense, I still feel it's like a win-win. So Cisco is still okay.
And also, I think it's the scale, right? Because more people are going to adopt to this, so you'll need much more of the hardware from these vendors than you would if you didn't go the software way.
True.
Right? I think the adoption rate will increase, and that would increase your, the scale with which people will buy.
Correct.
And that may actually offset.
Yes. Because once it becomes easier to use, then people are like, okay, let me experiment more. Hopefully, Facebook will come up with new apps saying that, oh, let me put all this in because I can get my network up faster. That's, yes.
Longer if the centralized software is sitting elsewhere to figure out that there is a failure, and don't we lose?
One thing you have to remember is the detection of the failure happens locally. It tells about so the link is going down, you know the best, right? But then it gives the information up, the topology changes, and traffic engineering happens from there. Detection still happens locally. Right, that information of failure is given, and the convergence. Now there's no convergence. Now what? Without SDN, if a link failed, you'd have to talk to everybody around you, do your link state again, converge, which takes forever, right? But now that information of failure is given there. He has the whole topology picture. He will say, okay, all the routers change your routing table to use another link. So your convergence is much faster. Detections has to happen at hardware. There's no. That's how it works.
She doesn't still look happy.
No. She works for Cisco.
The company. Any more questions? One? Okay.
Yes, OpenFlow is from Stanford. So right now there's version 1.2.0 coming up. So it's like a published set of APIs that all the vendors need to follow.
So it's like how the IP protocol has its own RFCs
Exactly.
and all that.
Same. Exactly same.
Thanks.
So when we talk about open, the support for this is going to be a nightmare. So take for example Linux. So Linux Torvalds is managing it so well. So do we have a well-defined way to?
I always say just buy Cisco and let us manage everything. But anyway, no, you're absolutely right. Because, but what they are saying is OpenFlow itself comes in with a lot of management APIs as well. So, hopefully with that, you will be able to kind of debug, whatever, with it as easily as they claim to. So, see, this is a developing technology, right? So as and when people start deploying it, you'll see problems and you'll see APIs to solve the problems. So it'll eventually get up there. That's why it's central. I mean, the forum itself has all these companies involved. They are the ones who are making these drafts. So yeah, so basically, if you look at the SDN forum in Stanford, it has Google, it has Juniper, it has Cisco, I think Brocade, and professors from Stanford themselves. So a lot of input is going from the vendors themselves, saying that you need to have these APIs for troubleshooting. So that is a very important part, right? Yeah. So that's what happens, right? So last time when we talked to Facebook, they were like, just give us the APIs, we'll manage everything, and just give us the code. They asked us for the code. And then I said, okay, we'll give you the code, and if something goes down, you should be able to fix it. They said, no. That you manage. Just give us the code. Then I'm like, you can't mess with my code and ask me to debug it later, right? So it's always this this game which goes on. So. Thanks so much for choosing this topic and the other two interesting ones. Thanks.
They can share. We don't have a choice. All right, I'll start off. I know it's Friday afternoon, so it's quite a thin crowd that I see out here. But I'll still start off because I do have an illustrious panel with me. I read somewhere that people say that if your claim to fame is just based on your ancestors, then you're pretty much a potato because everything is down underneath. It was not that great a joke. So from that perspective, since I have an illustrious panel out here, I thought I should start with the session. And I will not go into details about their profiles. I've got to know a little bit about each one of them, so I'm hoping that through the discussion, you get to know a little bit about their perspectives and their personalities. So I'll dive straight into the topic. So with the last 2 days, all of those who are left in this room would have heard snippets of conversation about a lot of things to do with women in senior management, women in mid-management, and generally women at the workplace in corporate India. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to have one session, which is slightly long, with all the senior members out here and try and wrap up what we have heard for the last 2 days. So you should have heard things like the glass ceiling, I'm sure quite a number of times. And when I was looking this up, I came across too many glass stuff. I heard there is something called navigating the glass labyrinth to get onto the glass elevator, and then you reach the glass cliff. So we'll start by decoding some of the platitudes that people generally say these things exist, and we try and figure out, are we just doing too much of studies and too much of sessions and panel discussions, or is there something really beyond all of this? Now, the glass ceiling was a term which was first used by 2 women in Hewlett-Packard, so we have an HP people out here, that's great. Catherine Lawrence and Marianne Schreiber, and they described that while on the surface, there seemed to be a clear path of promotion, in actuality, women seem to hit a point which they seemed unable to progress beyond. And the anecdote out here is, upon becoming the CEO and the chairman of the board of Hewlett-Packard, Carly Fiorina proclaimed that there was no glass ceiling at all because she has reached right at the top. And after her term at HP, she called her earlier statement a dumb thing to say. So my first question, and I'll start with someone who's been an advocate for Grace Hopper for 3 years now. I've always seen her at every event, and that's Rebecca Parsons from ThoughtWorks. So my question is, as vocal advocates for women in the workplace, is it something that we have to acknowledge that there is a glass ceiling? Or do we feel that if we don't acknowledge there is a glass ceiling, we may not be taken seriously as advocates of women?
Well, I think it's a difficult question because so much of it is situational. I believe firmly that there are many organizations now where there is no glass ceiling, where your performance is what dictates where you end up in an organization. I also unfortunately believe that there are still places, perhaps not with a conscious bias, but with a subconscious or an unconscious bias where there is in fact an effective ceiling. Unfortunately, there's also the problem, and I've heard this from both men and women when we talk about the glass ceiling, when people will come back and say, well, that's just an excuse. You know, you're just saying there's a glass ceiling because you're actually not good enough. And so I think we have to be very careful when we talk about the glass ceiling to acknowledge that in some places it doesn't exist, and in some places it is not an explicit ceiling, but yet we also have to be willing to look at ourselves and say whether or not it's not really that there's a glass ceiling, it's that we are not as ready as we think we are for a position. And unfortunately, deceiving oneself is not something that is just a male or a female trait. So I do think we have to talk about it because there are strategies, particularly when the ceiling is unconscious and when people don't actually realize that they are imposing a different set of criteria for promotion to senior ranks. I think we have to talk about it, but we have to talk about it in context to make sure that we don't open ourselves up either for this, oh, you're just using it as an excuse, or not acknowledging that in many places that ceiling has been shattered.
Okay. I'll bring Meher in out here. She's from Microsoft, incidentally. And I remember discussing and talking about this topic with you. And you mentioned something. You said since the number of women at senior management levels itself is so less, there is a perception that there is a glass ceiling because the number is too less to promote. So is it something which kind of enhances the dichotomy that the fact the numbers are so less, few get promoted, hence you think there's a glass ceiling?
Absolutely. So just to kind of, is this working? So absolutely, we've got, the reason we talk about the glass ceiling is because the numbers are small, right? So the number of women that are kind of, going up the corporate ladder, it's smaller than the number of men. So, the number of people that get promoted or people who get these big roles are less than, right? So that's the reason, in my opinion, there's a percentage